Hey y'all, welcome back to Killer Queens. I'm here with another recap of the Karen Reed trial, and we have got some exciting testimony to get to today. Did a witness commit perjury? That will be coming up, and it's pretty wild. We are only on I'm only talking about days 1 and 2 testimony, and we've already got some like wild stuff happening. So definitely hang in with me while we discuss that. I did do a poll on YouTube before I jumped on here live, and it looks like I said, what do you think we'll learn from week 1 witnesses? And 60% say a major inconsistency in the timeline, and 40% say a witness may have committed perjury. So let's get to it. Our first witness that we're going to talk about today is Timothy Nuttle. He is with Canton Fire Department. He's firefighter, paramedic, EMT, one of those. I believe he's all three. And he is going to testify here. So he responded to the scene that day of John O'Keefe found in the snow. He aided in life-saving measures to John O'Keefe. He witnessed Karen Reed's demeanor that day. He spoke with her, even those kind of things. So on direct, and I am an elderly and actually like physically hand wrote notes. On direct, and remember in the opening statement for the Commonwealth, Hank Brennan said, he kind of did his Eminem, like, knees weak, arms are heavy, mom spaghetti kind of thing. But he was doing that through the lens of this man, Timothy Nuttle. So he says he gets to work, the alarm goes off, he knows he's got to go on a call, like that kind of thing. So this is who he's telling that story through. He's showing a lot of dash cam in this. It's hard to see. It's snowing outside. There is no body cam footage in this trial at all. So every bit of video as far as like from the police that we're going to get is either through like surveillance video or dash cam. So the dash cam video is inside the cruiser, and it is really the only noise that you can hear is like the windshield wipers and Karen screaming. You can hear her yelling, Carrie, Carrie, Jen, Jen, Jen. You can hear her screaming like it. That's pretty much all you can hear there. But Hank Brennan has him go through this dash cam and say, are you here? What's happening here? All of those kind of things. They say that when they get there, they check John O'Keefe for signs of life. They don't see any signs of life. And then the person who was the lead on that call that day, firefighter Tony Flamati, who I assume will testify again. He testified in the last trial. Nuttle did testify in the last trial as well. He said, we're going to work on him. He said, their saying is you're not dead till you're warm and dead, indicating that John was very cold. He had been found in the snow. So they were going to work on him. And they decide to see if they can make any progress with this, and then we are going to hear from Timothy Nuttle about his interaction with Karen Reed.
Yes, sir, very much. Getting information on medications, history, and
Well, and I have already, that's not the right. It skipped ahead just a little bit, sorry.
You were nailing at his head. Well, let me ask you a more of a background question. Is it helpful to get information about the history of the person when you're trying to treat them when you happen upon a scene and you don't know the history?
Yes, sir, very much. Getting information on medications, history, and allergies is our top priorities in any call, not even this call, just really any your run-of-the-mill fall or chest pain. Typically the first questions that we ask: what medications are you on? What medical history do you have? And do you have any allergies? The medical history is important because if you've had heart attacks in the past, or just using a generalized example, if you've had heart attacks in the past, does this feel like a previous heart attack? It kind of gives us something to go off of.
As you were nailing, I want you to take us to that moment. As you're nailing, trying to help Mr. O'Keefe, did you have a chance at any point to look up?
I did.
And when you looked up when you were trying to help Mr. O'Keefe, can you tell us who you saw?
I saw a middle-aged middle-aged female with blood on her face. And I, real quick, as I was in the process of providing ventilations, I said, do you know this person?
The person that you looked up and saw that was standing over you with blood on her face, do you recognize that person in this courtroom?
Yes, sir.
With the court's permission, sir, could you point out that person that you looked up and saw?
In between Mr. Jackson or next to Mr. Jackson.
I see. And when you looked up and saw that person and asked about any background, what did she say to you?
I hit him.
How clearly do you remember her words saying to you, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
I remember it very distinctly.
You've been to a lot of calls over the years and since.
Yes, sir.
Would you say hundreds or thousands?
Thousands.
Do you remember all of them?
I remember aspects of various calls, but not all of them, no.
Okay, couple things here. Karen Reed is like mid 40s, maybe early 40s at the time, maybe. He called her middle-aged. That was hurtful. I'm not gonna lie, that was kind of hurtful. I get it. He's young. He's well within his right to do that. But as I inch closer, I get more offended. The next thing is, he says, that's not the important part of this clip. The important part of this clip is that he says, he's trying to get background information. Do you know this man? And she responds with, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Hank Brennan is going to go on to say, you know, you've been on a lot of calls. You don't remember every call, do you? He's like, no, I don't remember them all, but at certain aspects of them, I do. And then he's going to kind of get into, well, did you ask her anything else after that? Like she says, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And then what happened? He's like, well, she walked away. I am still providing life-saving measures, so I can't get up and follow her walk around. And so Hank Brennan is going to lean into, well, and you're not an investigator, right? It's not your job to investigate the cases. You don't ask the questions. You get the information you need and you move on. And he's like, yeah, which, okay, I get it. Can be kind of helpful. Like, okay, well, that's not your job to find out, to investigate the case. At the same time, if she says I hit him, do you want to know with what? Do you want to know with where on his body did you hit him? Like, do I need to be checking for injuries elsewhere? Where did you hit him? You know, like that kind of thing. So it's interesting. Now, sweet little baby Timothy Nuttle is going to claim in his testimony this day on the stand that his memory gets better as time goes on. That's a question I have seen attorneys ask so many witnesses, and every one of them is like, because they're always trying to set up that inconsistency in their statement. Well, back then, closer to the time of this incident, you said X, but today you say Y. But at the time that you made the statement X, your memory would have been better than it is now, right? And almost all of them say, well, yeah, it was closer in time to the incident, so my memory would have been better then. Not Timothy Nuttle. He says, no, my memory is better today than it was then, which can only come back to bite you in the butt, right? That's all it can do. So on cross-examination, Alan Jackson brings out, well, at first you said, I hit him, not I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Like, you said it twice, not 3 times. How many times was it? Okay, I guess that's like slightly inconsistent, but like, is that big of a deal? This is when he says, my memory is clearer now. Alan Jackson then brings out that, well, you spoke to Trooper Michael Proctor, Trooper Michael Proctor, and you didn't mention that to him at all. You didn't say that she said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him in that statement at all, did you? And he did not at first. And then there is some, because remember, his memory is better now than it was then. So now Alan Jackson is going to bring out some statements that he made that were not only inconsistent, but just like plain wrong. And let me get to that here. I have to scroll just a little bit. I'm gonna get it. I will. Little further. Here we go.
You testified last year as well that there is a normal protocol for removing clothing from a patient, and it's essential to just discard it and get it away from the patient so that you can concentrate on the life-saving measures that you're undertaking, correct?
Yes, sir.
That could be done you said in the ambulance, it could be done in the hospital, it could be done in situ, out there in the field, correct?
Yes, sir.
But the point is you want to get as much clothing off of the person as possible so that you can assess that person's physiology.
Yes, sir.
There's not really a lot of care taken to preserve the clothing from an evidentiary standpoint, in your view, correct?
We're trained to try and, just to take example of a shooting, try not to cut through the entrance wound of the clothing.
Fair enough, fair enough. I mean, when you're literally trying to save someone's life, your job is to get the clothing off and get it out of the way.
Yes, sir.
You're not sticking it in an evidence bag and sealing the evidence bag, things of that nature.
No, sir.
So it might end up on the ground.
Yes.
Right? Might end up with some debris on it.
Yep.
Might end up on the floor of the ambulance.
Yes, sir.
Could end up on the floor of the hospital, or on the floor of the hospital. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if it's tossed in the floor of the ambulance, the clothing may well pick up debris from the ambulance.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir.
Or the debris from the floor of the hospital or wherever. Is that yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You testified previously at the grand jury in April of 2022, correct?
Yes, sir. I believe so, sir.
Okay, so this happened in January of 2022, that same year, in the springtime, you testified at the grand jury, April 20th, I think it was.
Yes, sir.
Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay, I want to take you back to that testimony for a second. You testified at that hearing that Mr. O'Keefe was, quote, dressed appropriately for the weather. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
All right. It was obviously well below freezing at that time.
Yes.
That night that you responded?
It was.
We just seen the video. It looks cold as hell, right?
It was chilly.
All right. The wind was howling.
Yep.
It was snowing. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you testified that John O'Keefe, quote, had a heavy coat on and possibly 2 other layers of clothing.
Yes, sir.
In April 2024, you reiterated your very specific memory of and you even called it a puffy heavy coat that he was wearing, which was then removed so that you could assess his injuries, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Not to get too colloquial, but a puffy coat is like, it's got down and stuff in it, right?
Correct.
Looks kind of like Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Pretty distinctive article of clothing.
Yep.
And you testified last year that Mr. O'Keefe was wearing that clothing, which you had to remove.
And Timothy Nuttle knows exactly what's coming here because he had this discussion before, but he's handling it pretty well.
Somebody had to remove in order for him to be properly assessed.
I did testify that way, yes, sir.
Okay. And you mentioned that your memory of that big, heavy winter coat was as clear as your memory of other specifics in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
I asked you that exact question, didn't I?
You did.
And I said, your memory of him having that big, puffy coat on, which stood out in your mind, was just as clear as the other specifics that you've testified to about the case.
Yes, sir.
About that night.
He did. I remember that testimony. When they were doing this last year, he is talking about the big puffy coat. I remember the big puffy coat. And so Alan Jackson says, before what is about to happens, he says, and your memory of that big puffy coat is just as clear as your memory about all the other aspects of this case, isn't it? And he goes, yep. And they did that in the last trial. The defense did that in the last trial several times. So your memory about this particular incident is just as good as other things, right? And then they go to prove that memory incorrect.
And turns out you were completely wrong about his clothing, correct?
Correct.
Matter of fact, he wasn't wearing a coat at all.
No, sir.
He wasn't wearing a winter coat, correct?
Nope.
He wasn't wearing a heavy winter coat, correct?
Correct.
And he wasn't wearing a puffy, heavy winter coat.
He was not.
Yet you testified that he was wearing all of that, and that was clear in your mind at the time.
Yes, sir.
Did Mr. Brennan bring that up during the meeting 3 weeks ago?
He asked about what I had meant when I said appropriately dressed.
So you did talk about something other than just the I hit him, correct?
Yes, sir.
When I asked what y'all talked about, why didn't you tell us that?
To be perfectly honest, sir, I did not remember until right now.
So your memory is fading even after 3 weeks.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
This is the same man who on direct said, or maybe on cross, either way, in his testimony today, he says my memory gets better with time. Mine doesn't, obviously. But he says his memory gets better with time, and then this happened 3 weeks ago, and now he says, well, I didn't even remember we talked about that. But it's just, yikes.
The fact is, well, let me ask you a different question. Did Mr. Brennan tell you what Mr. O'Keefe was actually wearing?
No, sir. Actually, I believe you did.
Last year, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
It's a short sleeve t-shirt and a little thin wool hoodie, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Wasn't wearing a hat.
No, sir.
Wasn't wearing, as a matter of fact, didn't even have a shoe on, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
And obviously, goes without saying, but I'm going to ask it anyway, that's not being appropriately dressed for the winter.
No, sir.
Yeah.
His Boston came out a little bit. He's like, I mean, I could get away with, like, whatever. I wear a parka when it's 52 degrees outside, but they don't. So that is kind of the main impeachment, I guess, ish. I don't know. Bird law here, attorney at Bird Law, I don't know. But there were some things that they were able to kind of pick apart with him. If you watch the whole thing, I would say that Alan Jackson kind of ripped his testimony to shreds a little bit, just with your memory isn't actually as good as, you claimed it was. They do talk about John O'Keefe's injuries. So part of that is that, remember, John O'Keefe has the scratches down his arm. In his memory, they stop at right above his elbow. They do go further down. So that was another kind of memory that maybe wasn't incredibly accurate. He does talk about the hematoma over his eye, and next to that there is a little bit of a laceration. So Jackson gets into that could be caused by several different things, one of those being because they did also describe John O'Keefe as having like the raccoon eyes. That could have been from a fight, like if you get punched in the face, something like that could happen. Hank Brennan pronounces hematoma as hepatoba. And that's hard. That's hard for all of us. If you watch this testimony, you know that he called it a hepatoba, and he called it that more than once. And that was rough. He pronounces so many things incorrectly, and he's such a smart man, and sometimes it's hard. Now, do I mispronounce things? Of course I do. But we're not here to talk about me. Okay. So next we're going to see a clip. So what the prosecution is doing, which I think is, at least as of now, effective and going to be effective. They are playing clips from Karen's media interviews. They're weaving them in. They're playing them when they want them played. They're playing them in relation to maybe what testimony they have coming up or what they've just played. They're also doing that with the text messages between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe. They are having Trooper Guarino read those in at times that they deem appropriate. And I do think that splicing them in like this, instead of just playing them all together, reading them all together, they're telling a better story than they did a year ago with Lally. It's a better presentation. This clip, and the clips are very, very short, and we will listen to this one.
I remember from the time you left off, you happened. Did it come back to you or something? I mean, how much do you remember?
I remember it, but I question, do I remember it because it's been relived so much? I mean, when I see the video of me driving from the waterfall, like what I just described, tapping the brakes when I crossed the intersection, Washington over Sherman Street, do I actually remember that I kind of slowly proceeded through that green light? No, I don't actually remember that. But I've seen the video so many times that you then question, did I remember it on my own? Or was my memory jogged? But I also wondered, did I say, could I have hit him? Or was it told to me that I said I hit him? And I knew I never could have said that, so the closest I must have said was, did I hit him? I know I said I hit him, but did I really say it as many times as law enforcement's claiming I said it?
All right, tell me how you feel about that, because she starts out saying, I know I couldn't have said I hit him. So the closest thing I could think that I said was, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? But then she says, what I heard was, I know I said I hit him, but did I really say it as many times as law enforcement's claiming I said it? Tell me what you hear. Now that clip was sped up some. I'm playing all of trial at 1.25 because trial is slow. But even if you slow that down, it is still difficult to hear. So tell me what you think, because that kind of, I had a hard time picking up on exactly what it is that she says there. Next witness is Carrie Roberts. So she's a friend of John O'Keefe. She's a friend of the O'Keefe family. She grew up with John. They went to school together, middle school, high school, I think. They lived in the same city before he moved to Canton. She ends up moving to Canton later as an adult. Her kids are friends with John's niece and nephew, who, remember, he is caring for now, well, was before he passed away, because his sister had unexpectedly died of cancer, and then her husband had unexpectedly died of, I think, maybe a heart attack a few months later. I'm not sure that they actually say exactly what the cause was, but he was their guardian. And so he had moved to Canton to take care of them so they could stay in the same house that they had grown up in. And she lived close by. She jumped in. She seemed to be an excellent support system, helping with the kids. She said he would call her and be like, they have a headache, what do I do? You know, he wasn't a parent, he didn't have kids, so he's kind of getting a crash course, you know. And so she was there to help him. And so we are going to hear from her about when she gets the call. So she ends up being called and going to look for John the morning that all of this unfolds. She is one of the people that is there when they find his body or find him, and she's there that day.
What was the reason that you woke up?
I got a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning from Karen Reed.
Were you expecting a call?
No, I was not.
Had you ever received a call at 5 in the morning from Miss Reed before?
No.
Share with us what happened that morning. What did you hear?
Karen called, and the first thing she said was, Kerri, John's dead. And then she hung up. And then...
When she said that, did you have a chance to have a conversation with her?
No, I did not.
Describe her demeanor when she said that.
She was yelling loud enough, my name, I think it was 3 times, it might have been 2. She was yelling loud enough that she woke my husband.
Your husband was sleeping next to you?
Yes, he was.
Was she loud, yelling, screaming?
Yes, she was very loud. She was screaming.
After she said, Kerri, John's dead, did you know what she meant?
No.
And did you say this was around 5:15?
This was at 5. She called me at 5 on the dot.
After she hung up, what did you do?
I was half asleep still. I didn't know what was going on. So I started to get up, and I think I tried to call her back. I know I tried to call her back, but I don't know exactly when, because I was like, what? So my husband said, what was that? I said, I don't know. Something's going on. I don't know what's going on. That was Karen. And then I tried to call her back. I know I tried to call her back, but I don't know if she answered or if she called me back the next time I spoke to her.
After she called you again, did you have another discussion, or did you hear her say something else the second time you spoke to her?
Yes, the second time she said, I think something happened to John. I think he got hit by a plow. He didn't come home last night. Kaylee was home. He would never leave her by herself, and I was not supposed to stay at the house last night. So I think something happened to him.
Did she say anything about drinking?
Yes, she said, we drank so much, I don't remember anything from last night. And I said, okay, where are you now? She said, I'm driving. And I said, you need to go home. Where's Kaylee? And she said, at home. I said, you need to go home and be with Kaylee. She cannot handle this, thinking, her uncle's missing. I said, you're going to get a DUI. You need to go home.
Was there anything else in the conversation that she said to you at that time?
She said, I'm going to drive to your house. Would you drive my car? And I said, yes. So at that point, I started to get dressed. I turned on the automatic car starter so it would warm up. Told my husband, I don't know what's going on. John didn't come home. And so I think my husband tried to call him, and I tried to call him. And my husband said, you're not going anywhere. It's a blizzard. He's probably on somebody's couch. And I was like, I know, but she's really upset. I'm just going to go. She wants to come here. I'm going to drive her car. And then I went out to my car and sat and waited for her.
When you called John, did you get any response?
No, I did not.
As you were waiting for...
Okay, so that's Carrie. That's the morning of. And I think what kind of sticks out to me in this testimony so far is it doesn't seem like anybody else is really worried. So it seems like Karen is hysterical. everybody else is like, he's probably on somebody's couch. He probably went and stayed with somebody. He's probably with a friend. At some point they say he's probably at home and you didn't even see him. Like, go back home and look for him. So it doesn't really seem like that many people are super worried. She does then tell us that during the course of that morning, I need to get my timestamp right here, that during the course of that morning, they go back and they are driving around, they're looking for John, they're doing the things, and there is mention of Karen Reed's taillight.
Did you hear any conversations in that open line with, or even any statements by the defendant?
I remember when I pulled in behind her car in Jen's driveway, and at some point Karen said, my taillight, and I looked, and Jen she must have had the brake done because you could see that there was missing taillight.
When you say missing taillight, was it merely cracked?
No, there was a piece missing.
Could you see that as you were parked right behind the defendant's SUV or Lexus?
She must have been applying the brakes because you could see it, but there was a lot of snow.
When you saw that the taillight had a missing piece, did you say anything?
No,
Did you think anything of it?
no.
How long were you parked behind the defendant's Lexus while it was parked in Ms. McCabe's driveway?
Not long. We were just, I pulled in and then we stopped, and then the next plan, at some point in that conversation as well, or maybe on the ride, because now we're heading to John's house to drop a car off. I pulled out of the driveway, Jen pulled out, and I followed behind all the way to John's house. And at some point, Karen said, I left him at Waterfall. And I heard Jen say, no, I saw you pull up in front of my sister's.
Was anything else said about the broken taillight?
No.
You followed Ms. McCabe?
Yes.
And to help us understand, you see on the left is the house?
Yes.
There's a motor vehicle in the middle of the driveway, but it's the vehicle.
So this is John O'Keefe's house in the picture. Then you've got Karen Reed's SUV there. So they are identifying the scene essentially and the state of the vehicle.
Left?
Yes.
And whose vehicle is that?
That's Karen's.
Is that where it was parked that night when you went into the house?
Yes.
In the motor vehicle to the right? You recognize that?
That's John's car, or SUV.
Thank you, you can take that down. I'm showing you a second photo.
Okay?
Do you recognize that photo?
Yes.
What is it?
It's the back of Karen's car.
Does it look like a fair and accurate depiction of her car as it appeared that morning in the early morning hours to you?
Yes.
Do you notice anything that's distinguished in that photo?
The piece that's missing in the taillight.
Which one?
The right passenger rear.
Do you know when, I'm sorry, do you know when this photo was actually taken?
I do not.
Although you don't know when it was taken, is that a similar, I move to introduce this exhibit.
Okay.
Objection. The court's permission to like to publish?
Yes.
So this is really difficult to see, but we're looking at here, this on this side is a regular image or regular taillight. On this side, you can see that's, now there is snow covering it, but it does appear that there's snow kind of down in maybe a little bit. So that's kind of what they're talking about. But one of the things that they talk about is that on the way to John's house, when they are talking about where to go next, if he's not there and all that kind of stuff, they're going to go look for him there. She says, Karen says, I left him at the Waterfall, which is, remember, the bar they were at the night before. And she says that Jen McCabe says, no, I saw you at my sister's house. You had to have gone to my sister's house, which, remember, her sister is Nicole Albert, Brian Albert's wife. They live at 34 Fairview. So that is a little questionable to me for the prosecution's theory, which is she knew she ran over him at Fairview, and then she left him there to die, and then she came back to Fairview knowing exactly where his body was because she's able to find it. Nobody else sees it, but she runs right to it, and that's because she knew where he was because she left him there. But to me, this says, because Jen McCabe testifies the same way as well, at least she did in the last trial, that Karen didn't seem to remember going to 34 Fairview because the last thing she remembered was, we got to go to the waterfall. We got to check the waterfall. And Jen's like, no, you were at my sister's house. So that definitely is interesting. They get to Fairview finally. They go back to John O'Keefe's house at this point, and this is when Karen Carrie says either when we, in the first trial, she says, when we get there, pull into the driveway to walk into the house, Karen gets out of her car, I get out of my car, we're going into the house, and she says, oh my gosh, my tail light, it's broken, look at this tail light, it's broken, do you think I could have hit him, oh my gosh, whatever. But there's actual ring cam footage of them getting there and all three of them walking into the house, and they get out of the car and they just walk straight into the house. There is no stopping, looking at the taillight or anything. So then later in this trial, now she says, well, it was either when we got there or when we left, I can't remember. For whatever reason, there is no ring camera footage of when they leave. Only when they get there. So, like all the rest of the video in this case, where is it? We may never know. Whatever. So then after they leave John O'Keefe's house, they do go to Fairview. That's when Karen sees John O'Keefe in the snow. And that is the end of day 1. So now we are going to move to day 2. And Kerri is going to talk here about when the first responders arrive. And I think I'm in the right spot. Yes.
I yelled for Jen. I carry blankets. I have 2 kids, so I carry blankets in the car. So I yelled to Jen to get the blankets. I don't know what I thought I was doing with blankets, but I wrapped them around his head, just thinking we're trying to warm him up. He was covered in snow.
When you first ran over, you mentioned that his head was covered in snow. Was his head fully covered in snow?
Yes.
When you looked down, could you see who it was at first?
At first, no. I had to dig him out.
When is it that you realized that this was your friend John?
When I cleared the snow off his face.
Did you feel his skin?
Did I feel what?
His skin.
Yes.
Okay. And could you tell us how it felt?
It was cold. Like he had been there in the elements for a while.
You mentioned that his head was covered with snow before you brushed off the snow. Was other parts of his body still covered in snow?
Yes.
Can you share with us what you saw?
His legs were covered. His arms were by his side. He was on his back. Karen had lifted up his shirt, so now his shirt was down, but I was doing chest compressions so you could see his clothing. He had blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. And when I put the baby blankets under the back of him, there was blood on the blanket, so I think he had a cut on the back of his head.
Was the blood from his nose and mouth frozen or running?
I don't think it was running. It was not gushing.
You said that you brushed off the snow from John's face.
Yes.
Did you brush it off from both sides?
Yes.
Did you brush it off to the extent that you uncovered his entire face and head?
Yes.
So, did you have gloves on?
No.
Bare hands?
Yes.
And that's how you felt the temperature of his skin?
Yes.
When you brushed off both sides of his face, did you ever feel any pieces of glass sticking out of his face?
No.
Did you ever see any pieces of glass sticking out of his face?
I did not.
How long did you give chest compressions for to Mr. O'Keefe?
Oh, I can't be sure. I would say 4 minutes, 5 minutes while we were waiting for the EMTs. I had Jen take over at one point, and then the EMTs came. So however long it took for them to get to us, 6 minutes.
When you were trying to save your friend John, did the defendant say anything?
She was just running around screaming, Kerri, Kerri, Jen, Kerri, Jen.
Was anything said at that point about her taillight?
About what?
Her taillight.
No, when the EMTs were around and they were working on the body, she was running around and saying, did I hit him? Did I hit him? Is he dead? Is he dead?
When you were waiting for the police and EMTs, just briefly, what was the temperature like and the visibility like?
The temperature was freezing because
Okay, so they talk about the temperature. It's freezing. Also, just really quickly, if you're here watching live, drop me a little comment or something. I want to say hey to you. And make sure you like and subscribe and do all the YouTubey things because it's super helpful. All right, so the first responders arrive. She is actually the one who finds John O'Keefe's phone under his body and picks it up and at some point gives it to the police. She can't remember exactly when. They go to the hospital. She actually goes and picks up John O'Keefe's parents and brings them to the hospital so they don't have to drive because, again, whiteout conditions, blizzard, treacherous driving. She says at one point, Karen Reed calls her, Carrie Roberts, from the ambulance. So Karen Reed, during all of this, at some point makes comments that say, if he's dead, I don't want to live. If he, stuff like that. Her father becomes concerned and calls this in. And so they actually section her, and she is taken to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation involuntarily. She does not want to go, but it is not her choice. She's made these comments, and so they are going to take her regardless. So she is now in the back of an ambulance, and she's got her phone though, and so she's calling, and she calls Carrie, and Carrie says that Peggy, John O'Keefe's mom, is like, what happened, Karen? What happened? And Karen says, I don't know. I left him at a party. And Peggy says, you just left him? And she's like, yes, I left him there. That's about it. Her testimony is very, very emotional. This is somebody who was very close to John. She still helps with the kids. Hank Brennan decides that it would be a good idea to show Carrie Roberts a photo of what John O'Keefe looked like in the hospital to see if that's what she remembers him looking like in the hospital. And she gets really, really emotional, and that felt very just like, did you need to do that? Why would you do that to her? So I don't know. I'm interested to see, it's a long trial. It's a 6-week trial. The jury may not remember that, but that felt just not necessary. She already was emotional. Like, her testimony was emotional. You didn't need to elicit any type of emotion. Kelly says, I hated that part. It was terrible. It was so unnecessary. Like, so unnecessary. She does say that she and Jen McCabe the next day go to a man named Sergeant Lank's house. He was also one of the responders. I believe he works for Canton PD. And they know each other. That's going to come up later. But they go to Sergeant Lank's house. She is dropping her daughter off to spend time with Lank's daughter. And Jen McCabe is with her. And she says she stays in the car. Lank's wife comes out to talk to her. How are you doing? How's the family doing? That kind of thing. She doesn't go inside. Her daughter goes in to hang out. And she also talks about making a timeline with Jen McCabe. So I have seen a lot of commentary about this and like people in chats and stuff like that. And they're like, this is so suspicious. Why would you do that? Like, what do you mean you made a timeline with her and like all that kind of stuff? And to me, she was not there the night that everything happened. Why is John essentially dead in somebody's front lawn? How did we even get here? What is happening? Everybody that was there that night was drunk. Karen doesn't remember anything. Jen doesn't seem to really remember anything, know anything. Like, nobody knows anything. So I feel like this is very much like if everybody, well, like, I guess not everybody. I personally have had nights, back in my 20s, but where like the next morning you're like, whoa, what happened last night? This is where my memory gets fuzzy. And then somebody will be like, oh, remember when, what's his name jumped off the and you're like, no, I don't remember that. And then somebody else is like, oh yeah. And then you were doing this and you were you get bits and pieces from other people. So I think that this is what she was trying to do. Like, what happened? Let me tell you what I remember. You tell me what you remember. Let's see if we can piece together what could have possibly happened. It ends up being, I'll say fodder for the defense maybe, and just knowing what all came out in the first trial, it could be important.
January 29th.
So that same day you found John, you were interviewed?
Yes.
Do you remember who interviewed you?
I do not.
Okay. Do you remember your mental state at that time?
I was not well. It was in the evening at some point.
Were you interviewed at a later time by any other law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay, where were you at that next interview?
I think I was at Jen's house. We were making a timeline together when 2 law enforcement showed up to question her. but I happened to be there, so they took us in separate rooms and questioned both of us.
Were you sober at that point?
Yes.
And what was your mental state then?
Still, we hadn't even had a funeral. So I was still, I couldn't believe what was happening.
And after John's passing, did you still continue to help out with the children?
Yes.
Okay, so then we get to Cross, and Kerri talks about the many times that she has spoken to the DA's office, the victim advocates, the Massachusetts State Police, and the DA, Michael Morrissey himself. And so it comes out that she's talked to them, all of them, around 50 times. Some phone calls, some in-person meetings, some text messages, some emails, some stuff like that. Jackson does a really good job in this cross-examination of tying every time Kerri Roberts is interviewed by the police and many of the interactions that she has with the state or with the state police or the prosecution, they are all initiated, or there is this presence somehow of Jen McCabe. Now, the jury in this case at this point does not know who Jen McCabe is. We do. Maybe some of you do, some of you don't. But I think that the way that he ties this together, in the last trial, Jen McCabe testified before just about anybody. She was very, very, very early on. This time they're not bringing her on as early. And I think that could create some like, well, who is this woman? And like, I've heard so much about her, and where is she? And why is she such a big part of the case? Like all that kind of stuff. It is very interesting that almost every time that not almost, every single time that Kerri Roberts was spoken to by police, had interviews, all of that kind of stuff, Jen McCabe was a part of that. And so he talks about how if you are influenced by somebody else, that can change your actual memory of things. Because maybe as you sit there and you go through this timeline, now you're being, you're getting somebody else's input and influence, and you might be internalizing that as your own. And this is the fault of law enforcement, okay? They never separated them for interviews. They never told anybody, don't talk to each other about this. Like they didn't do the things that they needed to do. Kerri Roberts is a civilian. Jen McCabe is a civilian. The law enforcement should have been the ones to do that. And the fact that they are interviewing people, at one point when they're interviewing Kerri Roberts, Jen McCabe is there at Kerri's house. Or Kerri Roberts is at somebody else's house and Jen McCabe is there. I forget, because there were several interviews. But the point is, Jen McCabe is close enough that she's hearing what is being said. Kerri doesn't think she could hear it, but we have text messages from Jen McCabe that came into the last trial that I'm sure will come into this trial, where she's like, oh, she's telling him everything, and oh my gosh, like she's texting like they're here interviewing her and all that kind of stuff. It is not a good look. He does bring up, when you talk about the taillight, you say it's when you got there. He brings up that that's how she testified at the grand jury, that when we got to One Meadows Ave, which is John O'Keefe's house, that's when we all get out of the car and she says, look, my taillight's broken. Do you see this? He does bring that out. There is a little bit of a funny exchange where he talks about them being at Sergeant Lank's house, and he's like, okay, so you drop your daughter off for a play date. He says it twice. She lets it slide the first time. The second time, she's like, look, it's not a play date. They're 13 at the time. And you can just see the like mom in her being like, my teenager will eviscerate me. Oh, Minnie, okay? My little doggy, well, she's not little, but she can't see anymore. She's pretty blind now, so she ran into the chair. Bless her. She's okay. But she was like, stop calling it a play date. She is 13. Like, she'll kill me if she hears me say that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of that influence. So we will come here. Sorry, I've just got to get to it. I don't know why my computer doesn't want to scroll. Okay.
Oh, I didn't go in.
You didn't have any communications with Sergeant Lank?
I'm sorry?
You didn't have any communications with Sergeant Lank himself, Mike Lank, on that trip?
No, I did not.
But you don't know whether or not Jen did?
I don't know whether or not Jen did. She went in the house to go to the bathroom.
Okay. You've indicated that there have been occurrences in which Jennifer McCabe has asked you to contact the DA's office on her behalf to ask a question here or there, get some information, correct?
To Steve Nelson, yes.
Okay. How many times, just a number of times, the volume, would you say that Ms. McCabe has asked you to reach out to the DA's office in one particular or another? On her behalf?
I don't think very many.
What does that mean? Of the 50 times that you've had
No,
communications?
maybe like 4, not many, to my knowledge.
When you would, on these 4 occasions or 4 or so occasions, when you would reach out to the DA's office, gather information, whatever that information may be, would you then report that information back to Ms. McCabe?
Yes.
You obviously understand the importance of providing statements to law enforcement that are free of influence of other people, other witnesses. Is that right?
Say it again?
You understand the importance of providing information to law enforcement as a witness to law enforcement free of influence from other people.
Yeah.
In other words, you want to be as accurate and as independent as possible.
Yes.
And that's because if your statement is somehow, or if your communications with law enforcement are somehow influenced by others, it might call into question the credibility of the person providing the statement.
Objection.
Can you answer that question, Ms. Roberts?
No.
Okay, next question.
Sure. A statement that's been colored by influence from someone else would lack credibility, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
I want to talk about the statements in the prior testimony that you have provided in this case, Ms. Roberts. There's been several of them. The first time you told your story to law enforcement was on January 29th. We've already established that, correct?
Say that again?
It was on January 29th, the first time you relayed your story to law enforcement.
Yes.
And that was to Trooper Dunn and Trooper DeChico. That's the name I couldn't remember.
I don't remember.
But you do remember Trooper Dunn.
I remember 2 troopers. I don't know their name.
Okay. Where did that interview take place?
In my dining room.
And who was with you when you gave that interview, if anybody?
My husband was home. I think my daughter was home at that point. My husband was home. I don't know if the kids were home.
Nobody else from outside the family?
No.
Okay. Who contacted you about doing that interview? How did they know to come to you at your home?
I don't remember. They may have just shown up. I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember what time the interview was? I'm jumping around a bit, so I apologize. During your conversation or conversations with Mr. Brennan and the members of the DA's office in preparation for your testimony, were any of those interviews recorded?
No.
Was anybody taking notes?
No.
No, none of the DAs were actually taking notes, the ADAs?
I didn't look around the table to see if anyone was taking notes, but I didn't see them taking notes.
No pads and pens on the table?
There was a lot of stuff on the table, but I didn't see anybody taking notes.
Okay. You received a phone call just before that interview started at 5:25 p.m., correct?
Around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Is this the night of the 29th, you mean?
This is the night I'm jumping back to the night of the 29th.
Yeah, I'm not following you very well.
That's okay. On the 29th,
Yeah.
when you were interviewed around 5:25 p.m., maybe just a little bit before that,
Yeah.
you received a phone call just before that, correct?
I do not know.
Isn't it true that Jen McCabe called you and spoke to you just before that?
I spoke to Jen McCabe the entire day.
Okay. Including just before that interview.
I don't know.
Did you tell Jen McCabe that you were about to be interviewed?
No.
Did you tell her at some point did you text her and tell her that the officers had arrived?
I don't think so.
Did she text you back and say, call me right after?
I don't know.
Okay. During the course of that interview, when the incident was still pretty fresh in your mind.
Okay, so I think we're going to see text messages that show otherwise, but she says she doesn't remember that. But it just, he really, this whole cross-examination, he pulls through, well, when you did that interview, she was at your house. When you did that interview, she was with you. When you went to Sergeant Lank's house to drop your daughter off, she was with you. She and Jen McCabe they'd met one time before the day of January the 29th. Now she says they're very good friends. I have to wonder if she saw Jen McCabe's testimony from the first trial. Jen McCabe did not speak very highly of her. But she says to this day they're still very good friends, so maybe she doesn't care about that. But then it was like after that, they're tethered at the hip kind of thing. Now, the biggest kind of moment is when they talk about her testimony at the grand jury, which would have been in April of 2022. And at that grand jury, Carrie Roberts testifies that she hears Karen Reed ask Jen McCabe to Google hypothermia that morning, the morning of the 29th. Why is this important? The jury doesn't really know all of this yet. They're going to hear this part of it. But on January 29th, there are Google searches on Jen McCabe's phone, and they become very important in this case. And so the explanation for the text messages that don't look good or the searches that don't look good are, oh, well, Karen asked me to Google hypothermia, but it was that morning when we were there with John. So we are going to hear about this.
Yep. I testified. I didn't hear it, but I was told that she was asked to Google it.
So she says now, I didn't hear Jen McCabe, or I didn't hear Karen Reed ask Jen McCabe to do that. I was told that she had asked her.
You testified under oath at the grand jury that at some point Karen was in back of the police cruiser, correct?
Yep.
Objection.
No, I'll allow that question.
Does that refresh your recollection as to what you told the grand jury?
Yes.
And isn't it true that at some point during the course of your testimony under oath, you said that Karen was in the back of the police cruiser?
Yes.
And then you went on to describe that Karen and Jen and I were standing outside and she made us all start holding hands and starting to pray.
Yes.
I mean, the she being Karen Reed, correct?
Yes.
And at this point, they had lifted John up and taken him onto the gurney, correct? That's
I don't
what you
know.
described.
I don't recall.
I'm going to do this again, just so we're clear. And you testified basically that you think, at least that's what you were telling the grand jurors, that you
Yep.
think that was the point at which they lifted John up
Yes.
and moved him into the ambulance, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
And then you were asked a question, what, if anything, did she, Miss Reed, ask Miss McCabe while they were sitting in the back of the cruiser that you heard, correct?
Objection.
Do you recall that?
I did not hear the question about Google being asked.
That's not my question. May I ask? May I inquire?
Just repeat that question.
Sure. Isn't it true that you were next asked by Mr. Lally in front of the grand jury, quote, what, if anything, did she, Miss Reed, ask Miss McCabe while they were sitting in the back of the cruiser that you heard, end quote? Do you remember being asked that question?
No.
Okay, so then he's going to bring her the grand jury transcript to verify that she can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that refresh your recollection? That was the question that you were asked?
Yes.
Okay. And in response to that question, you stated, quote, at one point she asked her to Google hypothermia and how long Google hypothermia, correct?
Okay. Google hypothermia and how long, and then she stops and she says, and Google hypothermia. Now, if you didn't watch the first, oh, excuse me, I just choked. If you didn't watch the first trial, you won't know this, but a big part of the first trial, and actually, well, in the opening statements, they do mention this, that there is a Google search on Jen McCabe's phone at 2:27 in the morning that is misspelled, so it's Haas long to die in the cold, but it meant to say how long. So here she says, I heard Karen Reed, at the grand jury she says this, I heard Karen Reed ask Jen McCabe that morning while we were all together, Google hypothermia. So the explanation that the prosecution is giving for the reason that that search is on Jen McCabe's phone is because it was actually at 6 something in the morning while they were there at the scene, and it's because Karen Reed directed Jen McCabe to do it. However, again, we'll see what the experts say, but in April of 2022, how did Carrie Roberts know? Because she started to say, she said hypothermia, and then she started to say how long, presumably to die in the cold. Maybe that's not what she was going to say. but how does she know that that's there? You know, like that is interesting. That's interesting. That's going to be something the defense is going to get into, I think, with Jim McCabe or the expert witnesses or whatever. But that's what she says. Now, Adam Lally says, of course he says, what if anything? Adam Lally's favorite thing was what if anything. What if anything did Karen Reed say to Miss McCabe that you heard? That you heard. So now she's like, oh, I didn't know it was that you heard.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
That was very detailed. You'll agree that that's a very detailed and specific recount of an event. You recounted where you were, back of a cruiser, or they were in the back of a cruiser, correct?
Yep.
You recorded or reported the time. It was right around the time that you thought they were lifting John up and scooped him up onto the gurney, correct?
Yep. I thought it was about that time. I wasn't sure.
Location.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that answer. You were talking over each other.
That's my mistake.
What was your answer, Ms.
I
Roberts?
thought it was about the time they lifted him up, but I wasn't sure.
You were very detailed about who was there. It was you. It was Jen. It was my client, Carrie
Yes.
Reed, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
You were so detailed that you talked about where you were standing next to the cruiser open door, correct?
Yes.
What the others were doing, holding hands and praying, is that right?
Yes.
And the actual words used. You were as detailed about all of that as the actual words used. She asked her to Google hypothermia and how long, and then you stopped, Google hypothermia, end quote, correct?
Correct.
You will agree, at least for that purpose, you painted a very, very detailed picture in front of the grand jury, didn't you?
Yeah.
Except it's not true, is it?
I did not hear her ask that. I was told she was asked that. In
The
the
answer to my question, Ms. Roberts, and I'm not a trick question, what you told the grand jurors was not true. You never heard her, my client, ask anyone to Google anything, did you?
I did not.
And yet, that's what you testified to under oath, under penalty of perjury, in front of the grand jury, didn't you?
I did.
And the reason you did that, the reason that you said that false statement, was because someone told you to say it, correct?
Object.
Is that, I'm going to let her answer now.
Nobody told me to say it. I knew it happened at that time,
How did you
which
know
is
it
why I
happened?
said it.
How did you know it happened, Ms. Roberts, if no one told you it happened?
Because we wrote a timeline. We already spoke about
So
that.
the timeline that Jennifer McCabe helped you with, that influenced your testimony in front of the grand jury, correct? Obviously.
I was telling what happened in the back of the
Ms.
cruiser.
Roberts, the timeline
You can answer.
you wrote,
So when you ask a question, let her answer, okay?
the timeline you wrote, with Jennifer McCabe's help, influenced your testimony to testify in front of the grand jurors to a statement that you never heard, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I need to know what you guys think. Do you guys think that's perjury? Do you think she lied on purpose? Do you think, like, what do you think about that? You know, she says she misunderstood the question. She didn't hear all of it. She didn't hear that he said at the end that you heard. She just thought he said, what did Miss Reed ask Miss McCabe? What, if anything, did Miss Reed ask Miss McCabe? Brennan on redirect is going to, he does what I'm learning stuff about trials. So he does what is called bolstering his witness, where he gets on in redirect and he says, but this was a traumatic event. You didn't mean to lie. You didn't, blah, 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 all this stuff. And it was really difficult. You couldn't, how would you be able to remember all these things? And you didn't hear what he said. You didn't get up there to lie. You got up there to tell the truth. It was a traumatic, like that kind of stuff. So he's doing a lot of that. And he accidentally at one point says, when you were he meant to say interviewed and he corrects it after, but he starts to say influenced. And I was like, yikes. Like, the defense knocked it out of the park with this cross-examination, I think, because they get Brennan to actually or accidentally say influenced instead of interviewed. And then there's kind of a slip with the judge here at the end too, which is very interesting. And I do want to play that clip. It's fairly short. There's some back and forth with Jackson and Carrie Roberts, and then the judge says something that I think also is kind of like, wow, they've got everybody thinking about this. Kaylee says yes, she thinks it is I think she says yes, she thinks it's perjury. She said, I think she's manipulated in her memory. Oh, I'm sorry. Kelly says, I think she's manipulated in her memory. So it is really interesting because when you do talk to other people about events and you get their perspective, it is easy to be like, oh, I don't know if I actually remember that or if somebody told me that. And that can happen. There's nothing necessarily nefarious about that, as Brennan would say. There's nothing necessarily nefarious about that. That is just sometimes how our minds work. Our brains want to fill in the gaps. So if we hear something from somebody, especially somebody that she thinks is likely telling her the truth, her brain kind of filled that in, probably. From what I understand, perjury is very difficult to prove. It is something that you have to know that the person was like, you have to prove that they were knowingly telling a lie and that kind of stuff. In her case, to me, it does seem like she maybe adopted that into her memory, and she doesn't shy away from it here, which is very interesting. She's like, yes, that's what I said. No, it wasn't true, but it is what I said, which is very interesting. Do you think that this totally kills her credibility with the jury? Like, do you think that whatever other information that she offered, which could have looked bad for Karen Reed, do you think the jury wipes it away now? As you watch this, do you still think that the rest of her testimony is credible? Like, I'm very interested to see. But Jen McCabe definitely does have quite an influence on this trial. And the one before, or this case, I guess.
Recross?
You just asked, just a few minutes ago.
Now she's annoyed.
Did you ever say that you actually heard that statement about that Google search? And you said no.
Correct.
The question that was posed to you by Mr. Lally was, what, if anything, did she, Miss Reed, ask Miss McCabe while they were sitting in the back of the cruiser that you heard, correct?
I misunderstood the question.
And you misunderstood that question?
Yes.
What did
I
you
did.
misunderstand about that question?
I didn't know it was that you heard, so I was explaining what happened in the back of the car.
I see. So you just ignored the part, literally, the part of the question where he said, what did you hear her say? That's what your
I think the word
testimony
was
is now?
heard, and I didn't hear it. I obviously got the question wrong because I did not hear anybody ask about a Google search.
Well, I know that's what you're saying now. I get that. But when you were asked, what, if anything, did she ask Miss McCabe while they were sitting in the back of the cruiser that you heard, your immediate answer was, at one point, she asked her to Google hypothermia and how long dash Google hypothermia, end quote. Correct?
Correct.
That was your answer.
Yes.
Correct?
To a question I misunderstood.
And that was a false statement, wasn't it?
Technically.
Technically?
Yes,
It's like being a little
technically.
bit pregnant, Ms. Roberts.
Okay, so remember, jurors, I said earlier, comments of counsel are not evidence and you're to disregard them. Ask a question.
Thank you, Your Honor. What do you mean technically?
Technically, I was under oath, and I did not hear Karen asked Jen to Google it,
And yet under oath.
but I
you-
knew it happened at that
And
time.
yet under oath you said you did.
Correct.
And that was a lie, correct?
Objection.
Was that a lie? Did you lie?
I did not intentionally.
But you did.
And,
Not intentionally.
okay, that's the end of
Understood
this.
the question, Mr. Jackson.
All right, is there any other question or was that
I
it?
didn't hear what she just said.
I said I misunderstood the question, Mr. Jackson.
That's what you're saying now, correct?
That's what happened.
All right,
Can I ask one more question?
okay.
In that quote, you said, at one point she asked her to Google hypothermia and how long. Then you corrected yourself and finished with Google hypothermia. What did you mean by how long? What were you about to say?
I don't recall.
Had someone told you something about a phrase that started with how long?
I don't recall.
Hypothermia?
I don't recall.
Like, for instance, how long to die in cold?
I don't recall.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Ms. McCabe, I'm sorry, Ms. Roberts, you're all set.
She calls her Miss McCabe. That was wild. That was so wild. Yeah. Tell me what you guys think. Ask Bob says she affected the grand jury decision very serious. I mean, that kind of seems like what is happening. It at least, I mean, she was indicted. So why would you say something under oath that you did not see yourself. I don't know what kind of prep they get for stuff like that. But if you didn't see it yourself and you were there that day, they're not asking you, what did somebody else tell you happened? They're asking you, what did you see here? What do you know to be true? Now, again, maybe as they went through that timeline and now she's hung out with Jen McCabe like 50,000 times by this point, now maybe it's just part of her memory. It's very interesting though. And Kerri Roberts testified in the last trial, but the defense elected not to cross-examine her. The prosecution didn't really get much out of her other than, they got her recollection out of the morning, but I don't think it was so helpful to them necessarily. I don't know. There was just something about it. The defense did not feel the need to cross-examine her, but this time they did. It may be that they have more information now. I don't know, but it definitely seems like something happened there. Whether or not she knowingly lied, she did say something at the grand jury that she did not know herself to be true. And Karen Read did get indicted. I don't think that's what indicted her. But it's definitely not a good look. So now you've got a witness that was actually helpful to the prosecution. So Timothy Nuttle at this point has already kind of been eviscerated because remember, he was positive there was that big puffy jacket and there was no such jacket. So then it's like, well, but do you really remember that happening? Oh, and by the way, you didn't tell anybody that happened. The first time you said that happened was much later. And that's going to be a recurring theme too. Every single person that morning that heard Karen Read say, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. At least this is what happened in the last trial. That never appears in reports. If it does, they're much, much later. But these are people that would have been interviewed initially, and for whatever reason, they didn't include it in their own reports. They didn't include it in their interviews with the police officers to the extent that they even got interviewed, because many people who should have been interviewed were not, and not for months or years later. These things just don't show up in the reports. And so that's another thing that kind of makes you scratch your head. Like, okay, well, why did nobody include it in a report? How did it make it into nobody's report if that many people heard it, saw it, were part of that conversation? There is one more interview that they play here. I was going to get into Peggy O'Keefe's testimony, which isn't super, super long, and then the intro to Trooper Guarino, but we are already over an hour, so I'm going to play this clip and we'll stop here, and then I will pick back up with Peggy O'Keefe in the next video. So let me get to this clip. And remember, they're interspersing these clips here. Oh, no wonder I'm at the wrong. Okay. Like, this isn't what I want. Okay.
When my car was seized, there was a few small pieces of taillight missing that I had picked out at John's at 5:45 before we drove over to Fairview. I'm showing Jim and Kerri, look what I just did to my light, and I'm worried that there's gonna be some kind of electric short circuit. There's like the bulb is showing, and some of the red plastic's missing. So I picked pieces out of the light housing that had kind of collapsed within the light and dropped them in John's driveway.
Okay, so Karen Read does seem there to corroborate that she did show Jen and Kerri her taillight there at the house at the end when they're leaving Fairview, although there's no ring camera of that incident. There's ring camera of them getting there, no ring camera of them exiting. Now, I will say my anecdotal evidence says that my camera doesn't pick up every single time someone comes and leaves. There are plenty of things that I'm like when I tried to do this live stream earlier, our yard bug company, pest control company, I can't think of words, got here. So I was getting ready to start doing this, and then they pull in, which I didn't know, And then there's a doorbell and a knock and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, who's that? So I'm like, I should have gotten a notice, like a notification on my Ring camera. I have a different company, but still, on my camera. And I get a notification when they pull out of the driveway, but I got nothing when they pulled in. So it's not perfect, I do understand that. It is, once you factor in, when we get through the rest of the trial, all of the other missing video evidence in this case and all the other missing evidence. And remember from the opening statement, the lead trooper on this case, the lead investigator, was fired for his bias in this case against Karen Read. It's just a lot that doesn't add up, and it doesn't look good. But Karen says here, I did have pieces of broken taillight, and we will see later the video of her backing out of the driveway and hitting John's SUV right there with that same taillight. And she says that when they got back, she's like, oh my gosh, look at my taillight. She says she picks pieces out and they drop in the driveway at John's house. There were no pieces of taillight found at John's house, by the way. All of the pieces of taillight that come into evidence in this case were found at 34 Fairview. Like, what is that about? That's kind of crazy. So we are going to end it here. The last thing here, Ask Bob says, no one needs a friend like Jen. She'll probably come to realize this, hopefully sooner rather than later. Yeah. I have to wonder, did she just not see Jen's testimony about her in the last trial, and maybe they told them not to watch it after, even after, because there would be a second trial? I don't know. So maybe she really followed that instruction and didn't watch it, because I just have to think that if she did, they wouldn't be close friends to this day. That's how I feel. So definitely stick around. Make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you do the little bell thing so you know the next time I get on live, because sometimes I don't know when it's going to be. Like, I was supposed to go on live earlier today, and then here we are. And we are going to do more trial coverage. If you want other cases to learn about, listen about, know about, I've got a podcast, Killer Queens, a true crime podcast. You can check it out wherever you get podcasts. I also release those episodes here on YouTube, and we do some other things here on YouTube as well. So definitely check out all the videos, and I will